And thank you so very much for being with us as we are talking redistricting in South Carolina. The Senate in South Carolina today not deciding to move forward with a special session to take up the issue. We're going to get some reaction to all of this tonight with our State House insiders, Dave Wilson, our Republican strategist, Antjuan Seawright, our Democratic strategist. All right, Antjuan, your reaction to what happened at the State House today.
Well, Tip O'Neill said it best when he says all politics is local. And that played out here in South Carolina. Look, there's process and procedure. It would take 3/4 of the Senate in order to put the redistricting process or the open discussion onto the sine die resolution. That did not happen. But the largest setting here is framed as this White House and this administration, the MAGA movement, fueled, and a key ingredient is racism. Is simply trying to eliminate and exterminate Black political power and representation all across the South. And after they've chosen Tennessee, after they've chosen Louisiana, now they move to another Southern state. Likewise, from a geographical standpoint, to Mississippi, that they're also targeting, like South Carolina. We have one African-American congressman in our state, James Clyburn. We have a 6-1 map. You can't get more gerrymandered than that. So this move by the White House to try to further gerrymander the South Carolina congressional map would have backfired. And let me just say, Jim Clyburn is not the first African-American from South Carolina to represent from South Carolina to represent a district. He is the first since Reconstruction. But there were 95 years, Dave and JR, between Jim Clyburn and the last Black congressperson from South Carolina. And that's what this redistricting or this exterminating Black political power is all about from this White House.
Well, it's also very interesting when you take a look, Antjuan, at the very representative that you're talking about is Robert Smalls. If you've ever been to the State House, you'll see photos or paintings of him. And it's ironic that tomorrow they're breaking ground on a new monument at the State House for Robert Smalls, while the House and the Senate are debating whether or not to actually eliminate a Democratic district in the state where you have Jim Clyburn as an African-American representative. It's interesting, though, when you look at what they're actually setting out to do, because I think part of this has been the absolute pressure of Donald Trump to try to maneuver and get as many Republicans in Congress as possible during the next election. If they're running the math right now in Washington, D.C., and they're looking at South Carolina and saying, well, we can pick up maybe one here. Well, Alabama redid their map. They have a 6-1 split, as Antjuan just a minute ago mentioned, just like what we have here. And that has actually stood. And when you look at completely eliminating a Democratic voice from South Carolina, then what's going to end up happening the next time we have a Democrat in the White House? Because if you actually think we're never going to have one in the White House again, that's foolish. You have to realize that Jim Clyburn, and I've heard this from folks in Governor McMaster's office, Jim Clyburn did more for South Carolina during the Biden administration than just about all of the rest of the congressmen combined.
Well, Dave, let me just course correct you on one thing. This is not about eliminating a Democratic district. This is targeting African Americans, period, point blank. And we've seen this from this administration. We've seen this nag and this racism and this continued bit and bite by Donald Trump targeting African Americans. And quite frankly, this is about democracy. You know, we often say democracy dies in darkness. I often say democracy is a gift, not a guarantee. If you look at what happened in Virginia, overthrowing the people's will. If you look at what happened on January 6th, an attempt to overthrow the people's will. If you look at what this president has done in terms of an illegal executive order trying to ban mail-in voting. If you look at what they're now doing with racially gerrymandering districts starting all across the South, it's just wrong. And the question I would ask to all of my Republican friends, my independent friends, my media friends, how would you respond if this was Barack Hussein Obama doing the same damn thing as relates to forcing legislators all around the country to redraw maps in a non-census year?
Now, it's interesting, JR and Antjuan, because this is normally done, as Antjuan just mentioned, it's normally done within those first 2 years after a census. The census is done every 10 years at the beginning of a decade. And that's used to see how many people live in a state so that you can then apportion the congressional seats based upon the population. South Carolina has grown, which gave us a 7th congressional district. We're expecting more growth to come into South Carolina. That could eventually give us 8. If that happens at the next census, then we're going to really be looking at how the map gets drawn. But to Antjuan's point, JR, I think when you take a look at African American population in South Carolina floating in the upper 25 to 30%, and you have one representative that's African American, there is a voice in Congress from South Carolina that represents a population in South Carolina. That's what a representative form of government is. Now, Shane Massey, who is the Senate Majority Leader, had a real kind of tete-a-tete, at least verbally, on the floor, pushing back against Donald Trump today, as well as 4 other Republican senators who voted with the Democrats to say, listen, we're not going to put this in the sine die resolution. We're not going to take this up after the legislative session ends on Thursday at 5 o'clock.
Let's find it. Let's talk about what happens next, though, here. Governor McMaster, if he wanted to, he could call a special session, and it would only take a simple majority at that point if he calls them back to deal with redistricting, Antjuan.
I don't think the governor wants to abuse that power. That is preserved for emergency purposes, not political leisure. I think this would qualify as political leisure, particularly when the Senate Majority Leader said the quiet part out loud. South Carolina is the most gerrymandered state in the country. If you unravel the 6th congressional district, not only will it do something illegal that likely will not pass the court's muster test because you have to keep communities of interest in line, that part of the Voting Rights Act is still into place. But what you're also going to do is put Joe Wilson and Jim Clyburn in the same district. You're going to go from a 6-1 map to potentially a 4-3 map, which is going to make South Carolina even more competitive. So I don't think in a real authentic way, outside of noodles being wet and wiggling and folding to the will of Donald Trump, I don't think Republicans in an authentic way want to really actually do something as it relates to this map.
Well, and the other issue with this, JR, is you look at where we are in the legislative calendar. We're in the 2 days left in the legislative session. With only 2 days left, they're not going to be able to do that much between now and 5 o'clock on Thursday. The House continued to debate their version of the bill in House Judiciary this afternoon. They had started this morning with testimony, and it got raucous, and then there were protests going on inside the House chamber, inside the State House today, people calling for democracy not to be rigged. And when we look at this, we recognize the fact that there are really big competing forces going on here. And it seems a lot of the Republicans in the House, some in the Senate, are basically figuring out how to bow to the White House in this particular case and try to get something done so that hopefully that, can get a greater majority in the U.S. House. But here's the flip side of this. If this happens, and it is done this way, if the political tides ever turn, what's going to happen in South Carolina then? And so, yes, gerrymandering does go on. We do draw lines. They're not really neat sometimes. I mean, Jim Clyburn goes from Columbia, South Carolina, all the way down to the harbor in Charleston. That's a pretty wide district, but it is also representative of the population that is African American, more predominantly in that area.
And I would ask one question to Dave, to you, JR, to anybody else who may be listening to this program. If South Carolina was in such need of recalibration, then why would you want to have a 75% white district or a 6% white district? Why do you want to screw around with the black congressional district? That's why I know all of this is rooted in racism. And what they're trying to do is trying to literally make this the fastest case of rolling back black political power since Rutherford B. Hayes ended Reconstruction in the 1800s. And that's not a joke. That's not a 1877. That's not a joke. That's not hyperbole. This is literally an attempt to roll back black political power, black political representation all across the country, starting in the South.
So if the House comes back in a special session to finish work, say, on the budget, guys, is it possible they could revisit this issue again, or if they come back for a special session, does it have to be specifically only for the budget?
It has to be specifically for whatever's put in that sine die resolution. Sine die basically is the end of session. We are done now. And if they want to come back and do anything after that cutoff date, which is Thursday at 5 o'clock, then they have to agree upon that, do it in a resolution that both chambers vote upon, because that then sets the limitation of what they can and cannot do during what is the off session or an extended session of the legislature. And so if it's not in there, it ain't happening unless Governor McMaster does call them back in. And as to Antjuan's point, I don't necessarily think that's going to happen.
Antjuan, do you think this is a done deal now? This issue is going to just go away this legislative session?
I'm not. Democrats are not in charge, so I think that would be up to Republicans. But if I had to bet, I would not bet against Shane Massey and his efforts to remain steadfast, unmovable to his position, to not open up the gerrymandering process in South Carolina right now in this moment. I'm not saying it will not be done, but I'm saying right now in this moment, I don't think it would be done. I would also add that it takes 2/3 of the Senate. And so unless every single one of the Senate Republicans vote in the same direction to do this, this will not happen. And I don't, based on how the vote played out today, I don't see that happening, regardless of what Donald Trump and others may have to say.
Yeah, that vote today was 29-17 with the issue failing. Dave, what about you? Do you think this is tabled for the year, or is there going to be some sort of last-ditch effort to bring it back?
Oh, I wouldn't even dare to guess right now what's going to happen in the last 2 days of the legislative session. We're looking right now at a group of legislators in the House who are still, even as the Senate rejected this sine die resolution, they were still working through it in the Judiciary Committee just on Tuesday afternoon. They're going to get it up on the House floor. They're going to vote it through. They're going to send it across, because we don't have what's called crossover anymore, which meant you had to have a bill done about 4 weeks before the end of session. So they're going to be shuttling this thing back. Talk about shuttle diplomacy here. They're going to be shuttling back between the chambers, trying to get some sort of agreement together if the Senate thinks it can get the 24 votes it needs to get 50% plus one.
And I would just add, this is all politics. The reason you see this aggression from the House is they have primaries here coming up. The Senate has a 2-year shield window, if you will, before they face potential primaries. And so it's a little bit different. I think the House is trying to burn and churn out these things to get it off their plate, off their agenda, so they can go back home and say, Republicans can go back home and say, we did what Donald Trump asked us to do or asked us to do. Whereas on the Senate side, they actually want to do the political process as we know it, and enjoy the process, and really turn and depend on the institution as we know it.
All right, Antjuan Seawright, Dave Wilson, guys, as always, thank you so very much for your time. And of course, we have much more on this on our website for you tonight. Simply go to WLTX.com.